Hi, everyone, and welcome to Field Notes. My name is Sara Russell, and I'm a soil scientist out of Nacogdoches, Texas, and I'm the Field Notes regional representative for the South Central Soil Survey region. As a regional representative, I serve on the Field Notes Review Committee. This review committee solicits and selects topics for each webinar. We have two exciting topics selected for today's live event. But first, let's go over a few housekeeping items. This is a Microsoft Live event, not a Teams meeting, which means you are joining today's webinar in listen-only mode. We encourage you to ask questions at any time using the Q&A panel. The Q&A panel should open by default. However, if for some reason your Q&A panel is not open, simply click on the question mark icon located in the upper right side of your screen. For closed captions, turn on the live caption button located in the lower right corner. Today's session is being recorded. Recorded sessions are available in Teams on the Field Notes channel and the Soil and Plant Science Division's YouTube channel. Again, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's session. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Field Notes moderator, Deb Harms, to tell you a little more about today's webinar. Take it away, Deb.
Good morning, good afternoon, folks. As you mentioned, I'm Deb Harms. I'm acting for Dave Hoover today as a moderator. He just wanted me to let you know that the National Cooperative Soil Survey Conference was last week and that there were lots of presentations that you may be interested in. And there's a lot of information that will be available online. So please check the weekly update for those links. All right, our first subject is the Rapid Gap Soil Health Assessment in Tanzania. And Kristi Mingus of Price, Utah, Kristi Mingus of Price, Utah is giving that today. So please, Kristi, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction. Somebody holler if you can't see my slides. Right. I'm Kristi Mingus. I'm the Soil Survey Office Leader in Price, Utah. And this spring, I went on a short-term assignment conducting a Rapid Gap Soil Health Assessment in Tanzania. I'm excited to share about the work we did there. Okay, let me get this. An email was sent out to SPSD last September advertising for this detail, and Reich also mentioned it briefly in an all-employees meeting. So that's how I found out about it. Proposed activities in the announcement included conducting a pre-departure lit review and project assessment, participating in pre-departure meetings, conducting a minimum 2-week scoping trip in Tanzania, and producing a report with short-term and long-term engagement on improving soil health in Tanzania. The ideal candidate that they were looking for was a soil con or soil scientist at the GS 11 or 12 level, experience in delivery of ag extension services focused on soil health and conservation, experience working in international context, familiar with niche challenges of smallholder farmers, familiarity with tropical soils, and experience with landscape planning for service delivery. I've shied away from details in the past since the Price office has so much initial soil survey to wrap up, but this short-term assignment during our winter work was appealing. I traveled to Uganda, which borders Tanzania, for a month during undergrad about 10 years ago to interview farmers on their perspectives and adoption of conservation agricultural practices. Since working on that project, I've kept in touch with locals that I met and kept a pulse on agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. I also help manage my partner's 2.5-acre farm in my free time and have some firsthand experience on the grind of what it takes to run a farm, especially when you're trying to implement conservation systems and run into issues in the meantime. So I saw the application or the announcement in September. I applied in end of September, October, interviewed in January. In March, conducted the lit review and traveled to Tanzania and did report writing in April. So Tanzania is a country in Africa. It's just beneath the equator and it borders Kenya, Uganda, DRC, Zambia, and Mozambique. Where were we in Tanzania? We flew into Dar es Salaam, which kind of feels like the country's capital. We had a couple meetings there with USAID and some partners just to kind of do some briefing on the project, figure out what we were doing. Then we flew to Dodoma, which is the capital of Tanzania, visited a youth training center there, went to Iringa where we visited a couple more demonstration farms, and then we spent the second week in Zanzibar. Just a little bit about Tanzania. The president of Tanzania is Samia Hassan. She's the first female president of Tanzania. The primary language is Swahili, which you may be most familiar with from a couple of phrases from The Lion King, like Hakuna Matata means no worries. Simba means lion, Rafiki means friend. And English is spoken in most of the major cities. The major religions are Muslim and Christian. Actually, when we visited, it was during Ramadan, and Zanzibar is about 99% Muslim, and so a lot of things were closed when we were there. So it was an interesting time to be visiting Zanzibar. It was during their month of fasting. And just brief history, in 1964, the mainland area was called Tanganyika, and it merged with the island of Zanzibar. So Tan comes from Tanganyika, Zan comes from Zanzibar, and now they're the United Republic of Tanzania, but they still have some differences in government. So there's a separate Ministry of Agriculture for the mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar. Tanzania is home to Africa's biggest lake, Lake Victoria, Africa's tallest mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, and some of Africa's impressive wildlife like zebras, giraffes, lions, cheetahs, hippos, which we didn't get to see any of those big wildlife, but it's still pretty cool. All right, so the Tanzanian government right now is promoting this initiative called Agenda 1030, where they are wanting 10% growth in the ag sector by 2030. Goals under Agenda 1030 include ending hunger, achieving food security, improving nutrition, and promoting agricultural sustainability. There's a large focus on supporting women and youth in agriculture, and major crops include maize, sorghum, millet, rice, wheat, beans, cassava, potatoes, bananas, and plantains. And then some of their cash crops are coffee, cotton, cashews, tobacco, cloves, oil, seeds, spices, and horticultural crops, which is the term that they use for crops like tomatoes. Some of the goals that the government has for agriculture in Tanzania are switching from rain-fed agriculture to irrigated. So their rainy seasons are getting less predictable. Storms tend to be more intense and less frequent. And so where they used to rely on rain-fed agriculture, they're trying to switch over to irrigated in a lot of areas. They're also focusing on reducing imports and increasing local processing facilities. So they're trying to increase the capacity to process ag products from 10% to 50% by 2030, as well as cut imports of sugar by 20%, cut imports of edible oil by 30%, wheat from 40%, and most impressively, cut fertilizer imports from 90% to 0% by 2030. So they have some pretty lofty goals with Agenda 1030. They're also promoting the use of climate smart agriculture, which CSA, if you see CSA in this presentation, it's referring to climate smart agriculture, not community supported agriculture. It always trips me up that those have the same acronyms. But the use of CSA practices to increase production, income, and resiliency. And notice that income is very important here. In any country, you can't separate production and income from agriculture, but it's especially important to consider socioeconomic concerns when promoting practices in developing countries. In the early 2000s, conservation agriculture alone was promoted in sub-Saharan Africa, promoting practices that are beneficial to soil, but without enough careful thought around how switching practices could negatively impact human lives if production and income suffered. So CSA tends to be a more useful framework because it promotes conservation agriculture while emphasizing that practices must make sense economically, and therefore it protects people, which, you know, what's the point of agriculture if there's no people? So here is the USDA crew that joined this assignment from the States. Tom Poole is on the left. He's the International Program Specialist with FAS. and FAS stands for Foreign Agricultural Service. Drew Stout is just in from Tom. He's a civil engineer from NRCS Hawaii, and he did the solar power drip irrigation inspections for the project. And he was a really valuable team member because he's familiar with a lot of similar cropping systems. A lot of similar crops are grown in Hawaii as Tanzania. Then I was along to do a soil health report, and Andre Natomic was the Senior International Program Specialist from FAS, and he joined us just for the first week. So if you don't see Andre in as many pictures as the other people, that's why. We had two main partners based in Tanzania for this project. The International Institute of Tropical Agriculture is a nonprofit that aims to increase employment, improve livelihoods, enhance food and nutrition security, and preserve natural resource integrity through addressing pressing challenges of hunger, poverty, and natural resource degradation. Frederick Baijuka, who's on the left there, and Bahati Marangari on the right, are pictured, and they were the main IITA representatives working with us on this project. I'd been reading Freddie's papers on sub-Saharan African agriculture since my time in Uganda 10 years ago, and it was an honor to work with and learn from such smart and passionate folks. Our second main partner was SAGCOT, the Southern Ag Growth Corridor of Tanzania, which is a public-private partnership that aims to facilitate relationships between government, agro-industry, small and medium-scale farmers, small and medium-sized enterprises, and other stakeholders for growth and transformation of agricultural value chains in Tanzania. So basically, they create effective linkages between people who have resources with people who need resources, which is a need in any agricultural system. And that photo is a picture of the USDA team with a couple of the SAGCOT interns that traveled around with us during our trip in the mainland. So the project that we were working on is called Building Capacity for Resilient Food Security Program. It's the end of a 10-year project. So actually Tom is over in Tanzania right now wrapping up the project. Phase 1 was already complete when we hopped on, and that was where they identified climate smart agricultural practices that work in these systems, improved access to weather forecasts, promoted CSA practices in district scale development plans, and created technical resources to educate farmers. So they've created little pocket field guides for farmers on different practices that they could use, and have done a lot of work from phase 1. We hopped in on phase 2, which is called Scaling Climate Smart Agriculture. Some of the main goals were to improve soil testing services, to improve water availability for production of short cycle crops, to enhance utilization of CSA research findings from phase 1, and training of communities on landscape CSA. During our visit, we visited both the Ministry of Agriculture in both the mainland Tanzania and in Zanzibar to receive their blessing on what we were doing. We toured one youth training center. We visited multiple demonstration farms, and demonstration farms are run by a lead farmer and/or an extension agent. These farms are supplied with technology such as solar powered drip irrigation systems, and other farmers in the village are encouraged to come and learn from these farms at their convenience. And so basically there's these information hubs, and it's a pretty neat method of information sharing. So that's where we would talk about soil health and where Drew would inspect the irrigation systems. And we also visited a school of agriculture and toured the International Institute of Tropical Ag facilities. My goals on this trip, especially after realizing who we were working with on this project, these people have dedicated so much of their lives to improving agricultural systems in this area, and they know what they're doing, they're smart, they know what the obstacles are, they know what's been working and what hasn't. So my goals were to listen, learn, ask questions, brainstorm potential improvements, kind of spitballing ideas, and then to create a report with observations and recommendations based off of that. The Bihawana Youth Training Center is the only youth training center that we visited while we were there, but there are, I think, at least 10 other youth and farmer training centers scattered throughout the country. So the day that we visited, they actually began hosting its first cohort of 70 youth. These youth were embarking on a 4-month agricultural immersion program where they would learn everything from starting seeds, selling seedlings as a business, planting, irrigating, harvest, post-harvest storage, and markets. Some of the challenges at this site are just kind of inherently infertile soils. There's 10% clay, extremely low nitrogen, phosphorus, and organic matter. They're having some challenges just because it's the first year of establishment, so there's always obstacles in getting everything together, getting all of the systems in place. They have difficult access to material for soil cover and organic amendments like manure, so all of the soil there is basically bare right now, and a lot of that increases the risk of organic amendments oxidizing and just it's just a challenge to get material or to have a reason kind of to leave residue on fields. And then they had an issue with insufficient power from solar panels. So their solar panels were powering their school, and we're having some issues with that. Some successes, just the idea of this program is awesome. This 4-month immersive ag training for 70 youth at a time. I think it's great that there's a strong focus on successful business management, and youth will be connected to land and a secure market upon finishing. So education, land, and market are some of the hugest challenges for up and coming farmers. And I think that providing access to those things is a really great idea. So monitoring and evaluation is key to determining the success of these youth training centers, since it is early in their implementation, and teaching youth basic soil science and on-site evaluation skills will enable them to problem solve better when they get their own land. After touring the youth training center, most of the sites we visited were demonstration farms. We would arrive at the sites and greet the local farmers. We used a translator to ask farmers what challenges and successes they were experiencing on site. Drew would then inspect the irrigation system while I would continue to talk more about the soils on site with the farmers. The Wangama A site was probably the site with the biggest challenges that we visited. They had theft of 1/16 of their solar panels, which decreased the efficiency of their drip system. They were also one of the only sites that had the drip system already up and running at the time that we got there. So Drew's portion of this trip was just making sure that the drip systems that they installed would be running efficiently and would provide information on troubleshooting the drip systems, or provide recommendations for making systems more efficient if they implemented them elsewhere. So crop residue at this site is being burned instead of used as a resource currently. During the time when it was conservation ag was really promoted, they tried leaving residue on their field as soil cover, but it drew in termites, so that wasn't working for them. They also have a lack of improved roads, which exacerbates poor access to markets, and water scarcity due to drought is an issue. Plus, their water source is shared for domestic and agricultural use. So now that they're irrigating, they've got to be mindful that they don't deplete their domestic water supply. Key recommendations at this site are to protect solar panel investment with fencing, which also provides more of a challenge. It's really hard for farmers to have the capital to even invest in a system like this. And then when you're adding on extra costs, like, okay, now you need a fence so it doesn't get stolen. It just makes everything extra hard. They don't have access to credit. But that's one recommendation that Drew had. Composting crop residue instead of burning it as a recommendation. They stated that they needed business management training, and there's also some training needs around ensuring that irrigation is reserved for cash crops that need extra water. So this year they were using them for tomatoes as opposed to sunflowers, which will be okay without the extra water. So the next site that we went to was the Mahenge site. And at this site, we had a lot of time to brainstorm with the extension agent and farmers, which was fun. Some of the challenges that they were facing at this site was retention of youth, threatening the long-term success of this demonstration field. So I think they started off with a strong crew, and then a year went by and they dropped to like 20, and then a year went by and they dropped to about 5. So they're having a hard time with retention at the site. Record keeping issues. One of the people that left was their record keeper, and they brought their records with them, which creates a need for kind of a central hub for keeping records on site. Lack of soil tests causes lack of knowledge on appropriate fertilization rates, and that's something that we ran into at almost all sites. So that's something that almost every site listed as a challenge. They also listed waste management as a concern. So where do they put like fertilizer waste or things like that? And they're part of this project. An extension of this project is a couple of these demonstration farms will actually be getting waste deposition facilities. And then another thing that happens at this site, so some areas land is scarce, and so people are kind of stuck with what they've got. But in this area, people tend to migrate when land becomes infertile, which in some ways it could be good to leave your land just empty for a year and a couple years and let things regrow and just rebuild the soil. But in this case, they would rather promote kind of long-term management for soil health as opposed to moving somewhere else and then deforesting that land and leaving land susceptible to erosion just open. So successes on this site was that the extension agent was charismatic and enthusiastic. So you could tell that he was really excited about soil health practices and was really willing to share. The farmers all had a strong understanding of soil health and were really excited to talk about it. And on-site composting of crop residue was in place, so they weren't burning their crop residue, which is nice to see. A couple recommendations here are locally available soil testing kits will have fewer obstacles than imported ones, and that's something that they've run into in the past. People have maybe decided to ship soil testing kits from Europe to Africa, and maybe they run into some problems or run out of reagents, and then by the time that they're coming up for reorder, the product may not be available anymore, or the shipping lag time is really long, which just creates a lot of issues. So IITA is actually developing an in-house soil testing kit right now that is a part of IITA's business. So it helps fund their soil testing lab. They'll sell it to these demonstration farms at an affordable price. And then the extension agents will be able to also use it as a business by charging farmers a small fee for soil tests. And so that's one really cool idea that IITA has. They're really focused on keeping businesses local, and supporting the local economy and making things, kind of making these like resource distribution issues better by saying, okay, we will be able to supply this to you. You won't have to wait for this lag time with shipping from countries far away. Also, recommendations here were exploring different methods for youth retention. And one idea there was partnering with a youth training center such as Bihawana, which I just talked about, to find young farmers. So maybe they graduate at Bihawana and one of the 70 farmers from that youth training center could come to this site and help out and bring some energy and help, bring some new people in. So those sites were all sites that we visited on the mainland. And then the rest of them that I'll show were from Zanzibar. This is the Kunduni site, and it was one of my favorite sites. They had ducks, goats, chickens, and cattle. The fields were fertile from years of building up the soil with organic matter, and the farmer was charismatic and passionate. Some of the challenges at the site were that a mango tree had fallen into their poultry structure, killing 600 ducks, which one cool thing is, this farm had so much diversification that they were resilient enough that this didn't really bother them. Of course, it was a loss of money and just takes time to fix structures up, but they had enough other stuff going on that it didn't cause a lot of economic concerns for them, which is great. And that's exactly the model of systems for information sharing and teaching farming systems that are resilient that that they're looking for in this project. And the drip irrigation pump was just installed, but it wasn't working efficiently. So Drew did some troubleshooting on that. Successes here were it was a successful business model. They always have high crop yield, they said. Their diversification ensured resiliency. They had on-site manure to use as a fertilizer, so purchasing fertilizer wasn't as big of an issue here. And then the lead farmer hosts 2-week trainings regularly for farmers nearby in Zanzibar and Pembe, which is another island nearby. And he's really into helping other farmers. So basically recommendations here are to use this site as an example because they were just crushing it and it was exciting to see. So the Upenja Nguli site in Zanzibar is another site we visited. And they were getting a new drip irrigation system installed despite an old system that had failed that was still in place. So you can see in these pictures, there's these hoop houses that don't have any covering on them. And then in the rows, there's some drip line. And one kind of unfortunate thing about this site was there was an initiative about 4 years ago where they got these hoop houses and drip line. And when we got there, we were asking like, okay, you know, is anyone like, are we going to fix this system or are you just getting the new one? Because they were planning on installing the new drip system. And they basically were like, well, those systems failed and we don't really know what to do for fixing them. So those are some big challenges. And that's something that when we met with USAID, they mentioned as well as an issue. Just they're not interested in continually bringing in new technology and then abandoning it and not having anyone local who's able to help fix it. And then another challenge they mentioned was lacking access to soil testing and fertilizer. Successes here is secure market. They sell fruit to tourist hotels and they've got successful business plan. They weren't worried from an economic standpoint and the soil appeared healthy from on-site evaluation. But the biggest recommendations here are that initiatives must have local support to succeed. Local engineers, technicians, and distributors who understand drip irrigation systems or other technology being promoted are essential for long-term success. So even just having people who are selling the product in town is huge, which that bit of this project isn't in place yet, but that's something that that they're going to work towards as they continue on with this work, even though the FAS partnership is ending next month. The Zanzibar School of Agriculture is a school dedicated to teaching youth about farming in general, agriculture in general, but specifically they have a large focus on climate smart agriculture. So they have a lot of different demos of different climate smart practices here. And so they put in a reservoir at this site, and that was actually one of the biggest challenges that we noticed was that you can see right here that the edge of the reservoir is basically right at the edge of this road. So you can't really see in this photo, but there's not much of a grade there. So they're probably going to have to end up reinforcing that side of the reservoir and moving the road over a little bit to make it safer. So that was one challenge here. And then the other main challenge that was listed here was providing linkages between the school, government, extension, and local partners is a need. So having some organizations similar to SAGCAT, which is just in the mainland Tanzania, is also a need in Zanzibar. Successes here are that youth are exposed to climate smart agricultural practices. They have a strong partnership with the Research Institute and Ag Research Institute, which ensures that they have access to soil testing. So it's a school and they don't have some of the challenges that other just farms do, but they're excited and passionate about what they're doing as well. Some key recommendations here are this school has a program where after students graduate, they're supposed to return to their village for a month, find any agricultural issues and report some of these to the Ministry of Agriculture. But the people who we were talking to were saying that sometimes there's a disconnect between the problems that people will go out and find and actually having any problem solving taking place. And so this is where it could work to have a capstone project where maybe as opposed to at the end or after students graduate, they go and do these things. Maybe it's like a part of their final year, they work on a project, they make connections with other parties who have similar interests and get try their hand at some problem solving as opposed to just moving on. So overall, that's kind of that was what the site visits looked like. We did visit more sites than I was able to talk about in this presentation, but the overall short-term soil health goals, a few of them that we came up with were soil testing kits should use simple technology, nothing super complicated. The more simple it is, the more likely it'll be adopted with locally refillable reagents. Nutrient management training needs to be available when soil testing kits are distributed. Technology promoted at demonstration farms should have lasting structural and environmental sustainability in mind. And tagging onto that, also just practicality. So is this something that through the business plans, is this something that actually will make money? Is it something that will be worth it for farmers to adopt economically? And that brings us to demonstration farms are all required to keep a business plan and do record keeping, but some of them have a better system than others. And having a template for a business plan and record keeping that those demonstration farms can provide to farmers would be really useful in actually having those practices be adopted. And while farmers are at the mercy of current markets, policies, and socioeconomic constraints, smallholder farmers can make big improvements on their farms through recording observations and taking action. When we were visiting the Ministry of Agriculture in the mainland, one of the discussions that came up was that there is a lack of good soil maps in the area, and a lot of these farms are small enough that farmers probably know them better than anyone anyways. And so one thing that we talked about on site was encouraging farmers to make their own soil maps. And just as an exercise in empowerment and understanding your own farm, are there areas where you know that the soil's holding water better than other areas? That helps you with irrigation management, scheduling. You don't need to treat the whole farm the exact same way, especially in these smaller farms where you might be more able to do those little niche tweaks than you would on a big farm. And then outreach and education will be most effective when teachers are experienced farmers, strong communicators, and are passionate about improving soil health. So similar to that Kinduni site where that farmer was just, easy to learn from. I think that those type of setups are probably the most effective. We also came up with some long-term soil health goals under 4 different categories. So research-based, policy and programs, economics, and on-farm efforts. And I guess I'll just go through maybe one under each category because I'm a little bit long-winded here. But under research, one thing that we were recommending is that there needs to be kind of just reiterating that there needs to be effective links of communication from farm to extension to research institution to back again. So the research institutions are understanding what problems the farmers are experiencing, and then the farmers are getting the results and are aware of what the findings have been. Policy and programs. One of the ones that we came up with were the incentives for soil health building practices should be greater than or at least equal to incentives promoting conventional practices. Economics, it's really important that farmers are experiencing financial gains from CSA and soil health recommendations, or else adoption is unlikely and impractical and not benefiting them. So making sure that the economics of things are also aligning with the soil health priorities. And then on-farm efforts, in 10 years, it would be great to see these demonstration farms and youth training centers thriving as both businesses and educational hubs, providing current information and extension services to farmers. And just a couple take-home messages. like how can what I learned on this trip change what's going on in our local office. I farm locally, and a lot of times local farmers will come up to me and ask me what the NRCS can provide funding for different things. And I don't work on that side of NRCS, so it's even unclear to me. And I think that there's just sometimes a disconnect between what's available and what people know is available. And I understand that funding is supposed to come from resource concerns and what people's goals are, but I also think that there could be better communication there. So the planners in our local office and I have been talking about potentially making just like a one-pager of how everything works for local people. And then I also think that the idea of SAGCOT, the agency that's providing linkages between nonprofits, government, researchers, extension, farmers, and markets is really cool. It's a really cool idea, and on a local scale, I think that would make farming more manageable. And that's not a project that I'm tackling, but I think that it's an idea that's still sitting in my mind of just how to make systems better. So. And then if you're interested in international details, keep your eyes peeled for opportunities and apply if you're interested. That's what happened to me. I just saw that this was an opportunity and jumped on it. And then I'm just going to leave this up in case you're interested during questions, but this is where you can email Doug Curtis. It looks like this bulletin, this is the most recent bulletin that I could find, but it expires in September. So Doug is the person to register for the International Programs Division database with. And that's all.
Thank you, Kristi. That was great. Folks, if you want to ask any questions, just drop it into the question part of the chat down here, and reach out to Kristi personally if you want. And thank you again. That was very interesting, and I had a lot of questions I may reach out to. So thank you.
Yeah.
Our next speaker is Paul Reich. He will be discussing the Field Notes webinar series, and he'll be going over the SharePoint. So that will be fantastic. So Paul, take it away.
All right, very good. Thank you, Deb. I appreciate that introduction. Can I kind of confirm that you're seeing my screen?
I'm seeing the agenda.
Okay. Let me go ahead and reshare. Desktop. Okay. Now, do you see the Field Notes SharePoint?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Very good. I appreciate that. Okay, again, my name is Paul Reich. I'm the team lead for the Soil and Plant Science Division's Communication and Outreach Focus team. I'm also the organizer and co-producer of this Field Notes webinar series. And so today I really just want to make you aware of a new resource that we have for accessing all of the past Field Notes webinar recordings. And so recently we developed a SharePoint homepage specifically for Field Notes. And you'll probably notice in the Q&A panel, I did include a few of the URLs for the SharePoints and also for the YouTube channel. So the SharePoint page can be accessed in a number of ways. So, one way we also have this brand new Soil and Plant Science Division SharePoint site. And so if you're accessing it via this site, you simply go to the communications link, and there's a link for the Field Notes webinars. Click here, and it takes you straight to the Field Notes SharePoint page. Now, another way to access the SharePoint is via Teams. So if you go into Teams, and you'll notice there's the SPSD Field Notes webinar team, and just like any of our Microsoft Teams sites, you can actually open that team within SharePoint. And in fact, Microsoft Teams really is simply SharePoint. So those are really two ways to actually get to the SharePoint site. So let's have a look at the Field Notes SharePoint homepage. So whenever we do a live event, the webinars are automatically recorded. And then what we do is we process the recording and we make the recordings available in both Microsoft Stream and via YouTube. So you'll see here in the main page, you can easily access all of the past webinars via Microsoft Stream. You simply click on a particular webinar that you're interested in, and it starts it up right in the middle of the page. You can also access all the webinars via YouTube. And so we do have a YouTube playlist specifically for Field Notes. And this playlist is part of the USDA NRCS Soil and Plant Science YouTube channel. You also notice that on the same page, you can access the latest webinar in YouTube, and it'll play it directly within the page itself. Next, we'll look at on the right-hand side. If you want to get an idea of our future Field Notes webinars, you have easy access to the event information right here. Next, you'll see a list of our Field Notes regional representatives. These are the people you should be reaching out to whenever you want to share your work. I'm very appreciative of these folks for working so hard to support this webinar series. And I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of who our representatives are. So for Alaska, we have Phil Barber. For the Northwest region, our Field Notes rep is Crystal Briggs. For the Southwest, Russ Almaraz is our Field Notes representative. For North Central, we have two folks helping out as Casey Latta and Betsy Shug. For the South Central, we have Sara Russell, and Sara is also our co-producer. For the Northeast, we have Geraldine Vega Pizarro. And our newest representative is the representative for the Southeast. We have Devin Turner. And of course, Deb Harms is our Field Notes rep for the KSSL lab. So on the left-hand side, you'll notice that there's a link to viewing presentations. So this is just another way for you to access the webinars. And so here what we're looking at is this is basically a list of all the presentations. So you can scroll through, browse all the presentations. So each of the records in the list includes the title of the presentation, the presenter names, the webinar number, the presentation number, the date that the webinar was given, and then we have direct links both to Microsoft Stream and to YouTube, as well as some keywords. So if you click on the Microsoft Stream link, what it does is actually opens the video directly to that particular presentation. But you'll note one thing to be aware of is that right now we're currently linking to Stream Classic. We will be migrating to a new version of Stream that's called Stream for SharePoint. So the interface will look a little bit different, but I think the functionality will be very, very similar. You probably noticed that on the right-hand side, we have this list of keywords. And so you can use this list of keywords to filter the presentations. So for example, if you just wanted to see all the presentations related to soil carbon, you simply click on the keyword. And now we're just looking at all the presentations related to that particular keyword. So hopefully you find that very useful and make it easier for you to find presentations of interest. The last thing I want to show you is that we do have guidance information for presenters. And so you'll find a couple of documents that provide information on the live event experience, as well as some tips for making effective presentations. And then there's also a link to the latest templates for developing your PowerPoint presentations. Well, that was really just a quick overview of the new FieldNote SharePoint site. We certainly hope that you find it useful for exploring all of the many past webinar recordings. I have to say a big thank you to everyone involved in putting these webinars together, especially each of our past presenters for taking the time to share their work. And I really encourage each of you to consider participating in future webinars. Another big thank you to my co-producer, Sara Russell, working behind the scenes, assisting during these live events. I also want to thank Kristi Wiley. She was the co-producer for the first 2 years of this webinar series, and Kristi continues to do an amazing job helping to promote the webinar each month with a weekly update and also with the promo videos that she puts together. And lastly, I really just want to acknowledge Dave Hoover. He's the person that came up with the idea for Field Notes 2.5 years ago, and he's always been a big supporter, and he is our regular moderator. So I always appreciate the support Dave has for this series. Well, that's all I have for today. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting and educational. I do see a question for Kristi in the chat. And Kristi, would you like to address it? Can you see it? It's a very good question. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so Sharon asked, at the Wangama A site, was the burning of residue used for energy? And would there be a compromise needed for composting instead of burning that residue? And that's a really good question. I think when we were talking to the farmers at that site, they said that they weren't using it for energy, but that is the case in certain places. I think they were just burning it, but we did want to bring up, just since it's a demonstration farm, at least having an area maybe where they're composting so that they can teach other people how to compost, or talk about it, or use it as a bit of an educational thing. That's kind of where we were thinking with that recommendation.
All right, thank you. Again, if you have any questions for Kristi or Paul, please reach out to them, and we really appreciate it. Just save the date for the next webinar is August 15th in 2023. And so we will see you then if there's no more questions. Thank you all.